Thank you for joining us on another edition of Against the Current, coming to you from the Skyline Club atop the Old Republic building in downtown Chicago, as per usual. And we're happy to have our guest here this episode. Former State Senator Steve Rauschenberger, Republican from Elgin, served 15 years in the General Assembly, 15 glorious years in the General Assembly.
1992 to 2007.
Well, maybe, 10 years in the glorious majority and 4 years
in misery.
Yeah, right. Now the president and CEO of the Technology and Manufacturing Association. You've rebranded and represented the old Tooling and Manufacturing Association, but essentially your charge is the small to mid-sized manufacturers in Illinois.
Yes, TMA is a 90-year-old association started by 6 kind of forward-looking small manufacturers who realized nobody was going to train their workforce for tomorrow unless they got together and did it. The argument that, training together raises all boats. So TMA has always had a focus on training. We have a full apprenticeship program. We graduate apprentices in CNC, which is computer numerically controlled manufacturing, also tool and die making, and also mold making. So we're the last bastion where we do hands-on training.
So it seems to me manufacturing is very much like social services in the state of Illinois, which is that everybody's for it and nobody acts in furtherance of it. So, right, everybody's for social service, the provision of social services to vulnerable populations, and yet we're one of the worst states in the nation providing the funding and support for those service providers. And everybody in the General Assembly is for manufacturing because we need good manufacturing jobs. This is a manufacturing hub. And you, the TMA, recently released a scorecard of all the members, all 177 members of the General Assembly. And according to the issues that you put on your scorecard, what percentage of state legislators come out with grades that suggest they're actually acting in furtherance of small to mid-sized manufacturers in Illinois?
1 in 5, maybe
20%.
1 in 4, 20, 25%, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of staggering, isn't it? Because, not just because of the rhetoric that's offered up in support of those small to mid-sized manufacturers throughout the state. It's not just in Chicago and the suburbs.
We all are for good stuff.
Right. We're all for good stuff.
That's right.
But what is it that prevents the General Assembly, a body you served on for 15 years, as we just mentioned, from doing things in furtherance of the sector they say they're so supportive of?
I would guess, I would say it's a matter of a lack of vision and a lack of understanding. When I was down in Springfield, I served 15 years, and you saw these little bills come through. There was just one introduced last week which would require employers to notify an employee 2 weeks in advance of any change in his shift. Now, as you said, you're going to make law about how people are going to reassign shifts in manufacturing or any other job in the state of Illinois. I mean, this idea somehow that little increments don't really affect the whole environment is a big part of the problem.
So you don't think that state legislators in Springfield can do a better job of running a plastic injection molding plant in Elgin than the plastic molding injection management?
No, I guess I do think they can't do as good a job. Yeah, it's pretty
shocking.
It's pretty frightening. And the sad part is just incrementally these guys and ladies pass things that don't make any sense in the long run. Whether you're talking the plastic bag ban in Chicago all the way through, the kind of goofy stuff that passes down there. We're not going to get any better here until they get out of the business of micromanaging relationships that people have in their everyday life.
Well, so how do you measure who's supportive and who isn't? Give me some of the issues that are making Illinois particularly unfriendly for those small to mid-sized manufacturers to be here and resulting in businesses leaving, or to the extent they expand elsewhere. And we see that, frankly, not just with small to mid-sized manufacturers, but also with the big boys, Caterpillar closing facilities and ADM divesting from Illinois to other Midwestern states and so forth.
State Farm, it's not just manufacturing.
Yeah. Well,
big Illinois companies are choosing not to increase workforce here. I mean, we look at things that are employment relationships. In other words, are they passing mandates requiring employers to do things in this state that they don't have to do in other states? We look at things that relate to workers' compensation
Give me an example
costs.
of that. What does a manufacturer have to do here, a CNC manufacturer have to do here that they don't have to do in Indiana or Wisconsin or
just like the requirements for separate expression rooms for pregnant employees. Now, I don't know any employer that doesn't try to make arrangements for pregnant employees, particularly when they're expressing milk and they have babies. But the idea that you're going to regulate from Springfield with a one-size-fits-all requirement that there be a special room and dictate the size of the room and what's going to be in the room is very unusual. I mean, 3 or 4 states in the nation have requirements for rooms to express your milk. I mean, it's just, but nobody, and what they would tell you in Springfield, what they would tell you in Springfield, I don't want to vote against that. I mean, so
I don't want to be anti-woman.
That's right. We've got this big herd of people that are all worried about the next mail piece instead of about what they're doing to the state of Illinois. You know, as we slowly circle the drain. You know, we got bad debt in the state of Illinois. We haven't had a balanced budget in 7 or 8 years. We have no budget at all in the last 14 months or so. We're worst in the nation in dealing with handicapped and mentally ill people in the state of Illinois. Our schools are, you know, just run as if nobody was paying attention. Our colleges have some of the highest costs in the nation. So just what is it that they're doing well down in Springfield?
And so what are some of the things maybe that Governor Rauner has proposed, maybe that some other individual one-off legislators, some of the legislators in the 20% have proposed that would manifestly improve the business climate in Illinois, again, for that wealth-creating sector that we all talk about, manufacturing?
Well, at least somebody's talking finally about getting Illinois to average. You know, what Rauner talked about was, let's just get our workmen's compensation costs to the average of the nation instead of being the 3rd highest. Let's get our unemployment costs down into the average, down from 4th or 5th in those aren't long-term solutions because you're not going to grow from those. But maybe you can stop some of the bleeding if suddenly the agenda in Springfield is more, how do we help people find jobs? How do we retain middle-class opportunity in this state? But I mean, that's not what they're talking about in Springfield, unfortunately. And, you know, as much as Rauner, I think, has offered compromises and suggestions that, you know, we can be flexible in how we head in these directions, you know, there's just this decision on the part of Democratic leadership, Mike Madigan and, you know, the Emperor of Illinois, that no step at all. We're going nowhere. I mean, I've got my campaign contributors, I've got my political infrastructure, and we don't need to change anything.
And is it because the small to mid-sized manufacturers don't have the political clout to impose punishment for those that don't act in support of that industry?
I think that's part of it. The other part is that so many people trust government, or assume for the most part government works for their best interests, or believe there's nothing they can do about it. Some combination of those things. You know, it takes a long time to foment a revolution in the United States. But I mean, I think we're close in the state of Illinois. I just think, you know, we're either going to change in the next few years or people are leaving in droves.
Let's just distill down some of these issues, because you hear politicians talk about some of these things from the governor on down. Workers' comp system, it needs to be reformed so we're not paying the 3rd highest workers' comp cost in the nation, as you just said. But specifically, why is that the case in Illinois? What's different about the workers' comp system here as compared to other states? Why is it so much more expensive?
Well, it's the agreed bill process. I mean, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, it's the fact that there's been a requirement for 20 years in Illinois that organized labor sits at the table with the business interests and they hammer out a deal. So that means you got Caterpillar and John Deere and Ford Motor Company across the table from the unions. And the unions, of course, are well advised by the trial bar and the bar that focuses on workmen's compensation. So this is not about the ideal. This is not about injured workers getting the treatment they need. This is about the various interests cutting the best deal they can. I mean, we're not going to get anywhere with an agreed bill process. We ought to be looking at who has injured workers that get back to work without bankruptcy, where the families are taken care of, and where things turn out right. We ought to be copying those systems instead of incrementally tinkering with the Solyndra. I mean, we're taking a bad model and playing around at the edges. Now, I realize the governor has no choice but to kind of live in the environment he's in, but what's missing is this horizon vision by the legislators. Let's go look at what states do work comp right. Where are injured workers being taken care of?
Well, give me an example of that and what that regime is.
Well, Florida, I think, does a much better job. Florida has a no-fault, I think, work comp system where essentially, if you're injured, you go get treated. Okay, and then afterwards, the major medical and the work comp insurance companies fight out whether it was an on-the-job injury or an off-the-job injury. So in their system, every broken ankle is the same. One broken ankle doesn't occasion, a quick trip, an MRI, a casting, 3 weeks off work, and you're back at work on a walking cast, which would be major medical. Where the other side would be, the insurance company refuses to pay, the attorney refuses to settle, they go 27 weeks, it goes to hearing. The number of bankruptcies coming out of our workmen's compensation, which essentially benefit the attorneys in the work comp system, not the injured workers. We have more permanent partial disability come out of the state of Illinois than almost any other state in the country.
Is this where we get the kind of coffee on your lap kind of cases where, we talked to a social service provider, a $600,000 sprained ankle.
Yeah.
Because of this, and so now just forget the manufacturer, say social service provision where they're not for profit, they've got limited budget. $600,000 for their workman's comp costs for a sprained ankle because of this rigmarole you're describing. Yeah. It effectively puts them out of business too.
Yeah, it's much less expensive for everybody to pay for the right medical treatment for an injured worker, whether you're injured playing softball on Saturday with a broken ankle or on Tuesday running your CNC machine. The treatment ought to be the same. The cost of the treatment ought to be the same, but that's not true. Under workman's compensation, hospitals are allowed often to charge usual and customary. Okay, they do lots of things. 3-4 doctors end up on the case in a workman's comp case, where in the case of a broken ankle at the softball game, generally it's the treating physician who determines the case.
So what you're saying is, because you hear this a lot too, is the whole designation of whether the injury, I should say, occurred on the job or off the job. You're saying, yeah, that's a legitimate issue, but it's not the centerpiece of what's driving costs. It's how whether you're injured in the softball game or injured operating a machine, how it's treated differently.
Well, look at auto insurance. You and I, we both leave here. We have a fender bender. We both go to our insurance companies. They file with each other. You and I go get our cars fixed. Then State Farm meets with Allstate or whoever our companies are once a month, and they reconcile the claims. Okay, it doesn't. We don't have to shut down, get attorneys, go through hearings, and wait 52, 75 weeks for a settlement. Our cars don't stay broken.
And during that entire time, the worker's off the job.
Yes, and it benefits attorneys when there's not a settlement because of the size of the settlement, and they work for a percentage of the settlement. So there's these perverse incentives in the system, which mean the attorneys operating for the injured workers are not square up, and there's perverse incentives for the insurance companies as well not to settle.
So you're telling me that those lawyers that advertise on TV or that they do workers' comp cases on volume, they're being less than forthright? Is that right?
I think they're being very forthright for a perverse system. They tell. Right. It's just like Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan is not a felon. He might be if he didn't make the laws, but since he makes the laws, there's very. Yeah, but to say that they're moral, whether Mike Madigan or the work comp attorneys, that they're interested in the best interest of the workers, it's wrong. So to put them in a room with 3 or 4 or 5 big businesses only trying to make incremental progress and call that work comp reform is the wrong approach, and we've done it for 20 years.
And then on the other side, people don't want to be demagogue, not just kind of the room for pregnant women example, but also it's the same kind of game. It's you don't want injured workers to be compensated while they're injured and their family and be able to provide for their family, and you don't want injured workers to be given the proper medical care. So they kind of demagogue the issue that way, right. And it puts people back on their hind legs.
Yeah, exactly. So nobody wants to be the guy that stands up or the person that stands up. And I'll tell you that the unions are very active in Springfield. Any Democrat or anybody with union influence in their district. Or
Republican.
Yeah, Republican or Democrat, that crosses ASME or SEIU or those guys, they're merciless.
And so, okay, so there's workers' comp. Another area that's a cost driver for manufacturing that is markedly different in Illinois as compared to other states. It just kind of is again, perverse incentives like you're describing for work comp.
Well, the worst one of all is probably the classification property tax system in Cook County. To think that a manufacturer who's going to use less police, less fire, doesn't use the school system, requires very little in services, pays a 25 to 40% penalty on their property tax in Cook County is a crime. This is driving jobs out of Cook County. So when it's time to move, when you outgrow your facility or you need to downsize your facility, people look at the collars, or worse, they look at Indiana or they look at Wisconsin to move their operation. I mean, we've always been a strong manufacturing area. We've got great people, we've got great workers, we've got a reasonable infrastructure still, although it's kind of crumbling around our ears. But I mean, to lose these because we have bad public policy occasioned by the first Mayor Daley's desire to buy votes with low property taxes. I mean, they thought in 1970, when they passed the Constitution and allowed classification in Cook County, they thought their industrial base couldn't leave. Okay, and really they couldn't over the next 10 years. But TMA used to have over half of its membership inside the city of Chicago and another 35% of it in Cook County. Today, over 55% of TMA's membership is outside of Cook County.
Is this one of the reasons why South Cook County, for example, is like a demilitarized zone?
Yes. You got bad tax policy combined with bad policing and corrupt politics. Why would anybody make a 20-year investment in those areas?
When you could skip over to Northwest Indiana.
Yeah, or safe and dependable DuPage or Kane or McHenry, or, I mean, counties where there's still at least a political process left.
And the irony, of course, is in South Cook County, most of those communities, when you get into the south suburbs, most of those communities are majority minority communities. So who gets hurt the most? It's African Americans and Latinos that live in places like Phoenix and Posen and Alsip and Blue Island and Harvey.
And they're stuck. And, you know, I can't blame my members. I don't know why anybody would risk the kind of political and financial risk that it would take to locate in southern Cook County. Everybody that I know that's looking does not look in Cook County.
So what is changing that property tax classification system look like? Because I, you know, as a Chicago denizen, I like being subsidized by the business community, so I pay lower property taxes. I pay high enough property taxes as it is.
Yes.
You know, so you know,
well,
I like them as somebody else paying the freight. You know, I'm just another rent seeker like everyone else.
Everybody in the state of Illinois pays too much property taxes. I used to sit next to Laura Kent Donahue, Senator Donahue. She had a house in
Quincy.
In Quincy, right. She had a house in Quincy. She showed me pictures once. That house would have paid maybe $7,000 a year property taxes in Kane County. And my recollection is she was paying $1,500 or $1,800 and was astounded her property taxes were high. I mean, everybody's taxes are high, even if you don't compare them to somebody else's. What they have to do, I think, in Cook County is we got to freeze the levy on commercial and industrial property, okay? And over the next 10 years, let residential catch up, okay? And that means controlling the expenditures and asking Cook County to cut back on patronage.
But see, the problem is how tough a sell that is, because you have people in communities in South Cook, for example, but not just South Cook, think Rockford, these places where manufacturing has left, where they're paying for their home not 2 times because of their mortgage and the interest rate on the mortgage, but 2.5 to 3 times because of the property taxes.
Yes.
So now you're saying, and you know, you got to level up the residential over the next 10 years or 15 years or 20 years so that you can pay for it 4 times.
And you can't do it. You can't do it without going after the corruption in local government in parts of Cook County. I mean, you know, it's really nice to pretend that local government's not a problem in the state of Illinois. The community colleges are nothing but really true blue mission-oriented organizations, but it's simply not true. We pay too high a property taxes in general in the state of Illinois, but in particular, manufacturing does. But I mean, it's okay. We can continue the current tax policies and just watch that productivity and those employment-based leave. You know, none of this is going to be easy. You know, I was talking to a social service director from my Elgin, my old district, and you know, she wants to believe somehow that there's just one more negotiation and it's all going to be okay. And I said, Karen, I said, you don't realize this is Detroit. I mean, there's no fix for this. I mean, you raised the income tax back to I don't know, 5, 6, 7%. It's not enough to fix the problems in the state of Illinois. Well,
I mean, Karen Lewis and others suggest the problem is the flat income tax needs to be graduated. Maybe throw on a LaSalle Street tax on financial transactions.
Let's move the exchanges out. I mean, let's get rid of those. There's no sense having that productivity in downtown.
Burden, and all the insurance companies and financial services companies along with them. Let's get them out of here.
Yeah, I mean, let's make sure we close the door on any opportunity. I mean, it is a pattern. Watch, you look what Detroit did as it drove population out. Now, Illinois, following Michigan, I think, are the only 2 states in the nation that have lost population since the last census.
And so, but here's the rub. Everybody gets mailers in their mailboxes come election time that say that their state representative held the line on property taxes. They supported property tax caps. They froze property taxes. Now your property taxes keep going up, but I got my legislator, my state rep, and my state senator saying they froze property taxes. They've supported the caps, and so they're providing property tax relief.
I just wish people would look at those mailers the same way they look at the ones for hearing aids, the same way they look at the ones for the stoves made somewhere in Amish country that heat your house without cost. I mean, you know, we all get mail offers and emails that tell us, oh, click on here, you happen to win the UK lottery, but we don't believe them all. People ought to just look out and take a look at what's happening in their community and vote what they see.
And more like the email you get from the Nigerian prince. Yeah. And it's got $20 million he needs to hold. You need to hold for him, and he's going to cut you in on that. I mean, that's kind of what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we do these mailers. Suddenly, Ken Duncan goes from being the darling of Mike Madigan to suddenly he's a felon who's threatening to. I mean, now this is 20 years ago, but I mean, when does the credibility piece kick in, where we say, you know, I don't believe anything that people put in a mailbox in 4 colors? I mean, that's what I'm waiting for.
Well, so on property tax caps, because there has been property tax cap legislation and property tax caps imposed. So why aren't property tax caps?
Well, because they're just like our campaign finance law, with so many back doors that they don't mean anything. They don't hold the line on anything. The fundamental problem with our property tax are the units of government that are spending it. 72 to 75% of everybody's property tax is going to their K-12 school system. I mean, shouldn't we start asking for some accountability?
Yeah.
Okay, you know, the numbers back when I was in office were we spend more GNP on K-12 than any other country in the world except for Finland or Sweden. You know, we spend about twice as much gross national product on K-12 as countries like Japan. Now, there's differences between Japan. It's a homogenous society. Racially, they're all the same. There's a lot of differences, but we can still, I think, ask to hold K-12 accountable. Our K-12 system in the state of Illinois, I think, is one of the least accountable systems. We have over 890 school districts administering the students. Nobody knows who's making decisions or how. We have professionals paid to work 177-day school years. Our school year is 10 to 15 days shorter than any other developed country in the world. I mean, why? Do kids need to know less today in the United States than they did? You know, we have the shortest school year, shortest school day of any of the top 20 industrialized nations in the world.
You're fond to say that we still run school systems the same way we did when Harry Truman was president. Yeah. That was a while ago now.
Yeah, he would recognize the place except for a few laptop computers and iPads laying around in the place. I mean, we're still teaching them the Socratic method. What we know about kids, I mean, what we should know from all the brain development is people learn, and kids learn extraordinarily well. Okay, when they're motivated and they want to. I mean, they don't have any trouble picking up the apps on the iPad, stuff that I can't figure out. You know, 8 and 10-year-olds know. You mean somehow intuitively.
Right.
So why haven't we made any progress on how we share curriculum or teach people skills? And you know, this turning schools into social service agencies in charge of monitoring microaggressions and regulating the bathroom use of transgenders. I mean, so I'm not surprised that the adults running school districts are a little discombobulated. I mean, they're worried about being sued for not letting Cindy, who used to be Stephen, into the right locker room. I mean, I don't know.
Right, whatever Cindy's self-identifying as today.
Yeah, so, right. And so the federal government's main thrust is to regulate their moral vision on school districts instead of asking why we don't have better academic achievement.
So workers' comp, property taxes, another cost driver for manufacturing that could be different than it is without endangering workers or otherwise being unfair to people on the employment side?
Well, you know, the general tax climate, I guess I would say, you know, this idea that local taxes aren't carefully looked at in the state of Illinois, school districts aren't reviewed. Our schools in Illinois, for the most part, do not teach industrial arts anymore or any kind of practical. I mean, we have to have a major program to reintroduce STEM, which is science, technology, and mathematics, to schools. I mean,
that's something else that everybody's supportive of rhetorically.
Oh, yeah, rhetorically.
Right.
Yeah, and so we're going to bolt that on to the end after we do, you know, transgender studies and
well, but don't you worry we won't have enough kids on track to be poetry majors at Northwestern?
Yeah, listen, I think there's a shortage of baristas, and I think Starbucks knows exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're getting college graduates, baccalaureates in debt to come in and make mocha lattes.
So, on the tax structure, generally speaking, are you talking about personal income tax, the corporate tax?
The biggest single piece is property taxes. If you really take a look at the income taxes in the state of Illinois, at the current level, they're not that big a problem.
But you have to look at it in context of the overall tax burden. You can't just say, oh, we have a low flat rate compared to everybody else. Yeah, and then we wind up, according to the Tax Foundation, with the 5th highest overall burden.
Right, and we have the highest or second highest sales tax in the country. You know, our property taxes are 3rd to 5th, depends on whose score you use. So it's a combination of those taxes that make us less competitive. What people don't realize today is the CAD/CAM, the specifications to make a manufactured part now are shot out on the internet and received by companies all over the world. So in China, in India, in Mexico, in Indiana, Texas, you know, Ohio, every place. So my members get these designs and diagrams and have to price them out and compete worldwide. Now we've got some advantages. If it's an American manufacturer, our shipping costs might be less. You know, depending. But so all of those tax burdens that Illinois manufacturers, Illinois employers, not just manufacturers, because employers in general pay, that other people don't have to pay, end up as part of their price bid. They have to, because they have to stand a business.
If only we could take a page out of Donald Trump's book and impose tariffs on any company that leaves Illinois to try and sell their goods back into Illinois, then we'd be in business, right?
Exactly. So if you're a free trader and you believe things, you know, ought to go to where money is best appreciated, you're going to say goodbye to manufacturing in the state of Illinois slowly. But what's amazing to me is, at one time, TMA had maybe 3,200 members. Today we have 900 very bright, robust manufacturers. They've figured out, you know, the space between the elephants. Because my guys make a piece that goes to somebody else that makes a part that goes into a truck.
Second and third tier suppliers.
They're supply chain people. So it's down to tenths of a penny. So everything we do in the state of Illinois, whether it's bad roads or bad politics or bad tax policy, in the end, costs them some percentage of the bids they put out.
So are we going to have it where you have a concentration of the small to mid-sized manufacturers that are left? It's going to be in the largest contiguous industrial park in the world, in Elk Grove Village, but it's going to be surrounding O'Hare because of the logistic advantage that provides to be close to O'Hare for shipping and so forth, and for travel as well. It's going to be ring suburbs around O'Hare, and that's about it.
Well, no, you're going to continue to see any place on 294, any place on 355. I mean,
main corridors.
Yeah, main corridors are still pretty good for manufacturing and access to jobs. I mean, workforce is the biggest single challenge my members face. As bad as tax policy is, workforce is the bigger issue.
So let's talk on the kind of the supply side, the supply of labor. You mentioned not enough apprentice programs at the high school level. Community colleges sort of filling that gap. You're rolling your eyes, maybe
only
not.
If they get a federal grant and somebody begs them, they'll put some classes in that don't lead to a degree or don't lead to a certificate.
So those community colleges, because I mean this is one of the selling points, especially for workers who have become obsolete, or what they used to do is obsolete. They need to be retrained so they can operate successfully in the new economy, to the technology that's in manufacturing. You're saying that the community colleges, as good as they are, open enrollment, lower cost than going to four-year university, something like that, but that they're not where they need to be.
They're still in love with the baccalaureate, with 2 years here and 2 years at U of I, or 3 years here and 1 year at U of I. This idea that baccalaureate degrees are the ultimate expression of society's investment in education. And it's a terrible mistake for a lot of people that are technically proficient and good hands-on.
Yeah.
There are great jobs in manufacturing that pay $75, $85, $95. We have mold makers that make $125,000 a year that work at TMA. Now, starting wages are, you know, $10, $12, $14 an hour. You work out well in the first couple of years, you can be $18 or $20 an hour. So it takes a while to get there. You have to learn the skills. But
coming out of high school or coming out at 20 years old with an associate's from Harper or somewhere else where you've got a skill set that is applicable in manufacturing, you start to make pretty good money at a pretty young age.
Right. Or you get out of U of I and you got $65,000 worth of debt, and you end up as a copier salesman on commission. You know, trying to get people to buy copiers from you, or, you know, working as a barista, or, I mean, this idea that we don't need people who understand how to work with our hands, that understand how to work spatially with things, is a terrible mistake. Real wealth in a society comes from mining, manufacturing, and agriculture. When you produce something, the rest of it is all trading dollars. I mean, you know, at the groceries, retail, and I was in retail for 20 years, I'm no disrespecter of retail, but retail, you're trading dollars around. I mean, who gets the sofa and who gets the check? You're not creating any wealth. Wealth is created in manufacturing, it's created in extraction and mining and
multiplier
oil.
Effect.
Yes, I mean, and so the reason Illinois has done better than most of the rest of the country over the last 50 years is we still have 4 or 5 of the top 10 manufacturing zip codes in America. But little by little, Springfield's going to choke those right out of Illinois.
So 15 years ago, more than that now, one of my stints in state government was running a grant program that the state provided for small to mid-sized manufacturers to do worker training and retraining. Things like ISO 9000,
right.
but also specific machines. They buy a piece of equipment. They need a training program for their employees for plastic injection molding or CNC, whatever. The digital lathes and stuff. I mean, this is a long time ago, 15 years in terms of technological innovation is an eternity.
Right.
And it was amazing to me as somebody who has no technical proficiency, whatever. I'm one of those poetry majors I lampooned. That all of the cool things that are produced, and it's one of all cliches are true. A million ways to make $1 million in America, because they're making screws and bolts and ties and you know, machined parts, right? And it was fascinating to me to see all of the cool, interesting things that people manufacture around the state, because part of the grant process, the application process for me was to go do a site visit to make sure it's not a P.O. box and make sure everything's on the up and up, right? And it was such an eye-opening experience to me. I almost wonder if we should pass legislation to mandate that every legislator would have to do what I did, go visit 150 manufacturers around the state in the course of a year to understand exactly what they do, how important it is, what the opportunities are, and what the net benefit is, not only to that company and to those workers there, but to the community, to the region, to the state. Today's manufacturer looks today like a clean room did 15 years ago. Yeah. Okay, they're epoxy floors, they are spotless, they are full of safety equipment. One person generally runs between 2 and 7 machines. Nobody's standing there putting parts on and off of CNC. You can't afford that in the United States. You got to use this. Exactly. So, I mean, all of that really low cost, low value manufacturing's gone to Mexico or to China. And you know, God bless them. The people still manufacturing in the state of Illinois are brilliant. They are bright. They figured out ways to add value and something to the process that keeps them competitive, even though they pay a higher tax burden, they pay more for employees in other places, and they have infrastructure challenges. I still am trying to wrap my mind around this. The jobs that pay the kind of money you're talking about for kids, young people that are teenagers to early 20s coming out, and manufacturers go to Harper College or COD or wherever and say, oh, I got opportunities. I got openings. This is what we do. This is what we pay. This is the trajectory. You know, by the time you're 30, you're going to be doing better than just about all your friends, unless they're making apps. You know, unless they can code over at 1871 or something. And people just but I mean, it seems to me like both the young people, and maybe because they don't know as much, but the leadership of these institutions and the faculty just shrug their shoulders and say, yeah. We want more comm majors. We go with the path of least resistance. So what we've decided at TMA, part of our goal is to begin to target parents
to talk about career paths for their kids, because you get a high school kid who is good in math, who is good with his hands, who likes to be involved in manual arts. But I mean, if his parents think that he ought to go on to Harper and then on to Northern Illinois, or think that he ought to go to Northern Illinois University, you're not going to win that battle with $2 an hour. I mean, that's the fundamental. So we're starting to figure out how to talk to parents. We've had 20 years of pretending that manufacturing was gone in Illinois. We contacted some of those state reps and state senators when we were doing our scorecard, and some of them said things to us like, "I thought all the manufacturing was gone in Illinois. I didn't realize that it's still an important part of what we do here." Oof. I mean, there's this
that's almost more disturbing than pursuing policies that just. I mean, that's probably the most disturbing reaction I think I could imagine.
Yeah, and these are sometimes they're well-intended people. I mean, I think they value their jobs too much. Maybe we'd all be better off with term limits, because if they weren't worried about getting reelected, maybe they'd be thinking about work comp that was good for injured workers instead of work comp that got them contributions.
Or maybe they should be making what an apprentice is making at a manufacturer. Maybe they should be making $8 an hour to start too, just so that it's a little bit less attractive to be there unless you're going to do something.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they'd never stand, because you have to produce something in manufacturing. At the end of the day, there's got to be a product. There's got to be something you can sell to somebody else. The sad part about politics and higher ed and a lot of the institutions that we've created that we're pouring wealth into is there's no result at the end of the day. And they don't want to be measured. I mean, every time there's some kind of standardized test measuring high school graduation, accomplishments in the state of Illinois, in 3 years they have to redo the test because they can't stand the results. I mean, it's like clockwork. You go back 20 years, every 4 to 5 years we have a new standardized test to measure competency at graduation from our system, because the tests begin to show that we're not achieving anything. ACT and SAT have been recalibrated, every 5 years, because they don't like the results they're getting anymore. So pretending, that you've got an outcome is not the same as manufacturing, which is why very few of the legislators that do very well in manufacturing, because you better have a product that your customer is willing to accept, that meets specification, that serves a need.
So let's talk about state government, because for the 15 years you were in the General Assembly as a state senator, just about everyone conceded the point. It's very much like Scalia. Even if people didn't agree with you, they said this was the brightest bulb, one of the brightest bulbs we've had, one of the brightest bulbs we've had in a long time. You were the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, so you were like intimately involved in the budgeting process. As that for the backdrop of 8 months without a budget, and really, as you kind of alluded to earlier, 14 years without a truly constitutionally balanced budget, what should people understand about a budget deal, about state finances, about what the fundamental problems are in Springfield when it comes to making ends meet for all these programs that people want, where we spend most of our money, K through 12 education, Medicaid, pensions, and infrastructure, transportation infrastructure? What should they understand that they don't?
Well, I think the one thing I try to communicate when I do a Kiwanis Club or a Rotary Club is that there's no linear solutions any longer. You've allowed this system to be corrupted for so long that you can't fix anything easily anymore. Revenue doesn't solve the problem. They proved that with the last general income tax increase, where they dumped $2 billion extra revenue dollars into a system that's
annually.
The programs that operate in Illinois to deal with things like Medicare and medical treatment of the disabled and the programs are broken themselves. They're layered with incompetence. There's patronage involved. You have to programmatically look. It's not that we can raise the sums of money necessary to make sure that disabled people get treated right, to make sure that parents with aging out disabled children who did the right thing 20 years ago and kept their kids at home, now as they hit 70 years old and they've got a 190-pound son who needs full-time care, they need to know what happens when I die. What happens when I'm too old to take care of them? And state government's answer is, oh, we don't have an answer. Because ASME hasn't given us one yet. I mean, you know, we owe people a much better job, but you can't fix any of that until you get into the programmatics. People say in Illinois that we're starving the hospitals. We're not paying enough money to the hospitals.
In terms of Medicaid reimbursement.
Yeah, Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance. But you tell me, why then are there 9 hospitals under construction right this minute in the state of Illinois? Why are the bondholders lending money to hospitals to expand infrastructure when we already have too many beds? You know, we built a hospital system in the 70s for 5- and 7-day appendectomy stays, for, you know, postpartum stays that could be 7 to 10 days. But we don't need that anymore. So we have excess roof line in medical care today. So are they taking roof line out when they add these new hospitals? No. I mean,
so why?
We are putting too much cash into the system. They have to spend it. They're not for profits. So when Children's Memorial has excess revenue, they can't pay it out to shareholders. They can't buy a shipping company. They can't move it. They have to spend it inside the system or admit they're being overpaid.
And then the answer from the Democrats, like Lisa Madigan, is to impose more strictures, well, and taxes, but also impose more strictures with respect to like charity care.
Yeah. I mean, but it doesn't make any sense. We got to get to the point where we pay the right rates for medical treatment. In the state of Illinois, there hasn't been any work done on the Medicaid rates since 2001 was the last time anybody took a look at Medicaid rates.
And here's the thing. I mean, it's funny. People, you know, Medicaid, it's not sexy to talk about. A lot of people don't have any experience with the Medicaid system, fortunately for them. But it turns out 2 million out of 13 million Illinoisans that are Medicaid eligible. Yeah. So a whole host of people have real experience with the Medicaid system, and it turns out to be the worst quality health care that you can get. So all of the people that don't have to experience the Medicaid system, but think that they're being so noble and taking care of their fellow man by supporting ever-expanding sums of money pushed into the Medicaid system, it turns out that they're just perpetuating a system that actually victimizes the people they're trying to help.
And that's what I would tell you. And until you get to the core of how the aging program doesn't work, how the Medicaid program doesn't do the things it's supposed to, any more than the work comp system takes care of injured workers. These are all about connected insiders and people who benefit from the status quo arguing for their piece of the pie. And until we kind of break that mold, and that's why I was kind of excited when we had an outsider elected as governor, thinking, boy, let's bring some bright people in. Let's take a look at where Medicaid works. Let's take a look at where work comp works. Let's take a look. I mean, other places are getting it right. State government actually works in about 40 of the 50 states pretty well. It's just in Illinois, we're the poster child for a state government that is so self-focused on the politics and the fundraising and the re-election. I mean, you know,
and the distribution of benefits.
Yes.
I mean, Blagojevich, people forget this because, you know, they're so focused on the I got this thing that's effing golden piece of his impeachment. They forgot that one of the other charges for which he was impeached was illegally expanding the Medicaid program to try and make it a middle-income family entitlement to curry votes. Right?
Yeah,
and so,
buying votes with programs.
So the Medicaid system has been expanded beyond all recognition in terms of the vulnerable populations it was intended to serve, the disabled and pregnant women and indigent children. And so people are on Medicaid right now, accessing Medicaid, and that's only going to expand under the Obamacare expansion of Medicaid, that were never intended to be served by Medicaid. We can't finance the system now. You have people that are truly in need that don't get access to health care because we can't finance the system and we don't pay our bills. And so hospitals like University of Chicago stop accepting Medicaid patients. So, I mean, what
are we doing?
Right?
I argued, you know, if you got people showing up at a 7-Eleven to buy milk, okay, and you want to do a program for poor people to help them get milk, is it a good idea to go next door to the 7-Eleven, buy a building, put a roof up, hire people to go sell them milk? Okay? No. The smart thing to do is go where they're already going, okay, and figure out a way to get them their milk at the 7-Eleven and the infrastructure you already own. In the medical system, we've encouraged the development of clinics right next to hospitals where we build new roof line, hire new people to take advantage of rent seeking, you know, rate disputes, where if you're an FQHC in the state of Illinois, you get paid usual and customary to see a patient. If you go to the emergency room, you're only getting the Medicaid rate. So we've incentivized hospitals to support the development of a clinic right down the road doing exactly the same thing their emergency room does.
We started to do a redetermination of Medicaid rolls under Quinn, and it was projected by those that began, the consultant they brought on to do this, as well as the Kaiser Foundation, that if you remove people from the Medicaid rolls who were not eligible under the old Medicaid threshold of 185% of poverty level, I think that's what it was, that you could save somewhere between $500 million and $750 million annually. I mean, that's not the whole solution,
right,
but
that's a big piece of it.
That's a big number. But here again, nobody wants to have the mailer that says you're throwing vulnerable people off the Medicaid rolls.
So maybe the mailer is the problem. Maybe we need to tell people, you know, you serve in Springfield, you got 10 years, that's it. I mean, when I ran for office, I thought term limits was a bad idea. While I was in office, it seemed like a cheap and easy out in the 90s. But looking at the level of corruption we have in Springfield today, the inability of Republican or Democratic leaders to see beyond the next cycle, you know, maybe term limits is a dull knife. You know, it's not the right scalpel, but I've become a radical. You know, I'm pretty much willing to try anything because what's happening now doesn't work.
Maybe. I mean, again, looking at other states, and I know you do a lot of work for National Conference of State Legislatures, so you get around the country and you see, as you said, models of success that should be replicated versus failures that should no longer be perpetuated, like here. Maybe it's like Texas, where the state legislature meets once every 2 years. You essentially get a stipend. It's mostly ranchers and businessmen in the General Assembly, not lawyers and insurance salesmen and professional politicians. And boy, it turns out that generates very different outcomes, whether you serve 2 years or 10 years or 15 years.
And the first step of the reform ought to be the end of legislative pensions. Yeah. You know, I just have to tell you, it's the wrong. Yes, I mean, those are the wrong incentives. They perpetuate employment in the legislature instead of service in the legislature. You know, I stayed, did my 10-year stint and ran once more for the new cycle when the Democrats won the map, then tried to offer a statewide alternative to the Republican Party. I was not successful, then left. I mean, that ought to be more the model. It ought not to be 20, 25, 30 years of service, and you certainly can't afford a Speaker of the House for 38 out of the last 40 years. I mean, you know, there's proof positive of some kind of change is important, as Mike Madigan.
Yeah, right. I mean, and certainly Madigan and Cullerton, I think 30 years, 40 years is enough of a probationary period to make an assessment. You know,
or let's just take a look at the results of Mike Madigan's 38 years or 40 years as Speaker of the House. Where is Illinois today? Where was it when he started as Speaker? Are we better off today?
But now the problem, one of the problems is, despite where we are, you have Republicans in the super minority in both chambers. Isn't that a commentary? And President Obama recently in town to deliver his No Red America, No Blue America kind of sawing sawdust a bit, bringing us all back to 2004, and wasn't that fun? And this picture that was tweeted out by Kirk Dillard, former state senator, two-time candidate, Republican candidate for governor, longtime Republican legislator from
DuPage.
Yeah, from the leafy suburbs of DuPage. And he tweets out a picture that shows him in front of President Obama's motorcade saying, you know, the only thing faster than the RTA, of which he's now the chairman, you know, one sinecure to the next. The only thing faster is the president's motorcade, and it was such a great fun to be able to visit with President Obama, who he endorsed in 2007 in advance of the Iowa caucus. So fun to visit with him in the motorcade on the way to his glorious speech before the noblemen and magistrates in Springfield. And isn't that the problem of Springfield from the Republican perspective, that you've had Republicans at the leadership level complicit in what Blagojevich and Quinn, and frankly even Thompson and Edgar and George Ryan before them, complicit in these big government gambits that have put us in this position we've described?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's really clear that particularly the Republican leadership and some of the Republican donors don't understand that this is not a zero-sum game. I mean, you don't have to have the kind of leadership we have in the state of Illinois. You know, I'm just disgusted by the fact that for the last 10 years or so, I don't remember a single earth-shattering public policy alternative offered up by the Republicans down in Springfield. It's not like they said, you know what, public schools don't work, we know they don't work, here's 4 ways we can make them better. Because they're afraid of a mailer. I mean, they're afraid they don't do public policy because public policy might put their districts at risk. Well, listen, when you're down to, I don't know, what are they down to, 17 or 18 or 19 state senators out of
20 out of 59.
So what have you got to lose? I mean,
those 20 Republican senators have something to lose. But here's the thing, they don't, because you're basically down to base camp Republican. Right. So those Republican senators that represent Republican 70%. Districts, with one or two exceptions, they're not in seats that are at risk. They're not in targeted seats. Madigan could go all day long, at least right now and into the foreseeable future, in most of those Senate seats, or Cullerton could, Madigan in the House, most of those rep seats. You're not going to take out Jeannie Ives and Wheaton.
Yeah, so why are only just a very few of them, Jeannie Ives is a great example, talking about alternatives to the Mike Madigan House, which doesn't permit members to introduce bills or have them called on the floor for a vote unless Mike Madigan approves the bill individually? Why aren't they talking about alternatives to a K-12 system that really isn't producing, despite the amount of money we're dumping into it? Why don't they have a vision on ways to change the Medicaid system?
So why don't they?
Intellectual sloth. You
think it's just vacuity? It's not something more pernicious than that?
I know a lot of them. Okay, so it's really, I don't think most of them.
I know. Everybody's a nice guy and a nice gal. Everybody's nice, and then they go to Springfield and do a lot of not nice things.
Yeah, well, it's just they have bought into a system that this is the way it's got to be. That Mike Madigan should control the state of Illinois because he's got the votes. I mean, I don't, I had them come out, and I had a group of state reps, great state reps, come sit with me out at TMA, and we talked for 2 hours about ways that I would assault the budget if I were in their shoes now. I mean, kind of things to put out there that the Democrats, make the Democrats answer for what we're doing. They were all excited. I mean, they vibrated. They left, and 2 weeks later, it's over. I mean, it's such a... I don't know how to, it's Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, there's some good people down there who are trapped by a system that they think is valid, but it's not valid. This is worse than what they were doing in Detroit 15 years ago. I mean, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, we're so far past the constitutional requirements of the Illinois Constitution, the legislature should be indicted.
So, under RICO, criminal conspiracy.
That's right.
So if that's true, and we're so far past it, we could have all the good ideas in the world. Rauner's turnaround agenda, your turnaround agenda, some facsimile of the two, and you can't move without numbers. You got to win elections. You got to have numbers. So, what is the way out? Because good ideas doesn't seem to be the problem. It seems to be a lack of testicular virility, to borrow a phrase from our friend in prison in Colorado, or it's a personnel problem, it's a culture problem, it's all of the above. What is the way out? Because it's not putting together attractive 5-point plans.
No, they don't need another white paper. I'm afraid Illinois is to the point where we need a Puerto Rico solution. I think...
You mean to become a U.S. territory and not a state anymore?
No. I mean, essentially to file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
I mean, Puerto Rico is gone through a very similar thing with one-party control down there for 15, 20 years, where they promised everybody everything and didn't deliver on anything, and then just kept borrowing money. The city of Chicago schools went to the bond market and paid 8.6, 8.7% interest rates on a tax-free bond.
Yeah.
I mean, it is incredible. We are so far past what's normal in the other 48 states that it's impossible to even explain to people. So I think receivership, we ought to be suing, requesting in Congress the right to, because I mean,
but that's not going to happen because California, New York, Connecticut would be right behind us.
Well, and maybe that's the reboot it's going to take. You take the blue states where they have spent the future for 25 years, where they've made pension promises that nobody reasonably can ever redeem. I mean, this is not about, can we dedicate an extra $500 million or $750 million or $1.2 billion to a pension system. This pension system is so far out of whack, it is unrecoverable. I mean, we are now in the TRS selling assets, underlying investment assets to fund current retirees, and we've got this whole baby boom just beginning to retire. I mean, There's no sky. Duct tape's not going to help anymore.
And did you see? I mean, on that $725 million CPS borrowed at Sopranos rates, right? The balloon payment at the end, it's north of $1.5 billion roughly at the end of this. So where are they going to come up with that? They run billion-dollar annual budget deficits.
Already.
Right, in addition to all of the
Rom's solution
the legacy costs.
That Springfield was going to see the wisdom of dumping another $500 million that they don't have into CPS, and what were they going to take that one from?
So the answer is to redistribute from wealthy school districts. I mean, just on the schools piece of it, redistribute from wealthy school districts to so-called poor school districts like the city of Chicago that spend more per pupil than Wheaton Warrenville, where I grew up. So that's the solution. That's what Andy Minar, state senator from Decatur, has proposed, and it's it's got some legs. It's got some support, particularly among Democrat supermajorities.
Yeah, the brilliance of their public policy never ceases to amaze me. I mean, the idea that throwing everybody else into the kettle with CPS is a solution instead of dealing fundamentally with nobody. When was the last time you heard they talk about school funding? Ask them to talk about school spending. What do school districts spend money on? Okay, why are
isn't that the fundamental problem across all of these big ticket systems in state government? Inputs completely disconnected from outputs.
Exactly.
It's just about what we pour in for those mail pieces and television commercials and the like. It's not about what the outcomes are. The outcomes are, I don't know what they are, but the important thing is we continue pouring more money into schools. And frankly, even Rauner has kind of bought that line to some extent. Let's push more money into the school systems without structural reforms.
Yeah, and that was the only thing I've been disappointed by. And maybe there's some domestic politics in that. I know his wife's a big believer in K-12. I am too. I think K-12 is important to America. I think a vigorous, high-quality K-12 system is important in the United States. I just don't think we have one right now.
Now, going back to just the politics of this, in the Stockholm Center, just trying to get a handle on this, and this is conversation that happens internally all the time, and everybody's beset by it, myself included. But Rahm is about as popular as the New York Mets in Chicago, right? And yet, I mean, his approval rating is approaching Blagojevichian territory.
Yes, yeah.
2 West Side Democrat legislators propose a recall bill, and who's on it? Very few Republicans. A few of the new breed, the new freshman Republicans that are conservative, join with a couple of Democrat state legislators, not the Black Caucus, Democrats. Okay, they're beholden to Mike Madigan. They're beholden to John Cullerton. I get it. So they're just going to do what they're told. Again, there is no downside. Why Christine Radogno in the Senate? Why Jim Durkin in the House? The Senate and House superminority leaders don't say, yep, en masse. That we're taking a caucus position. We're going to support this, even if it doesn't apply to Rahm this term. We have recall at the state level for the governor and for state legislators. Why wouldn't we have recall for the mayor and for aldermen in the city of Chicago? I mean, after all, the city of Chicago is largely financed by the state. CPS is.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't we move en masse? And they won't do it.
Yeah. The cowardice. I haven't heard a single legislator talk about the new Auditor General and his campaign problems. I mean, we have a new Auditor General, which was the one bastion all during the Blagojevich administration where I could get real data. I mean, the Blagojevich administration wouldn't give me information. Senate President Emil Jones wouldn't enforce my right as the director of appropriations for the Senate Republicans to get information about the budget after, trying to remember the name of the budget director took over.
Bill Holland.
Yeah, no. Whatever.
Filan.
Yeah, when Filan took over, Filan just shut down information to the minority party and actually to most of the Democrats too. They weren't entitled information about the budget. I mean, that must have been the way they ran things when he was at the Park District in Chicago. I mean, that was good enough for them, is good enough for us.
Sure, scale it.
So the only people we had was we had the Auditor General's office. So now the Auditor General retires after 20 years. Pretty distinguished service, pretty square guy. We have a new Auditor General. Turns out he's got some real irregularities in his political campaign account that he won't answer for. And so where's Christine Radogno, who voted for him? Where's Durkin? Where are Republicans saying, you know what, you want to be Auditor General, you need to come clean on what your campaign finance statements say. Those are public documents.
Who audits the Auditor General? In addition to that, you had only 9, again, those freshman conservative and second-term conservative legislators vote against him for confirmation. It's a legislative move. It's not a governor move. Where's the due diligence in the first place to know this? This was a guy who was a mushroom down in LaSalle County for 20 years, spending money. Didn't have very many races over the course of those 20 years. And we find out that he spent $210,000
at a gas station.
At a gas station in his district to maintain his car or cars.
Yeah.
I mean that's a lot of money on a car. I mean, I don't know.
20 years,
I don't know if he had a
new
Bentley.
Car every 2 years. Yeah.
You could buy a Bentley every 2 years, or just about with that kind of cash. In addition to meals at his restaurant that he has an interest in, I mean all of that stuff, and it's just like, well, it's not a story because the Chicago Press Corps, which is in the tank for the Chicago Democrat political establishment, they say it's not a story, so it's not a story. I mean, it just seems to me you could have Madigan. To borrow a line from Trump, you could have Madigan opening fire on Michigan Avenue, and people would say, well, I mean, if Rick Pearson's not going to write about it, it's not a story.
Yeah. Well, and I don't care whether it's a story or not. The one true source of data that the minority Republicans have gathered for the last 10 years has been the auditor's office. And so you're going to let this get turned over to a political hack who won't answer for what he publicly disclosed, whether the Tribune writes about it or not. I mean, there ought to be bills introduced requiring him to disclose and to come forward or to resign.
Here's the thing.
Make Madigan kill those bills. Make Madigan defend his Auditor General that he selected.
Not only that, how about this? If the money that he spent, which was essentially, I mean, I think arguably personal use, not reimbursements for legitimate campaign expenses. That's called tax fraud because it's personal income. Bill Beavers, a Cook County Commissioner, went to prison for that. So why aren't you, in addition to introducing bills, saying, hey, Zach Farden, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, why don't you take a look at this? This is Bill Beavers on steroids. This is Aaron Schock, Mr. Downton Abbey, on steroids. Why should he get away with this? Aren't there legitimate questions that should be asked and answered? Why not have hearings? Why not do everything that you can to put a spotlight on this, if for no other reason than to show separation and to show that Republicans are going to police what's happening in the General Assembly and state government more generally, as well as ideally maybe someday policing themselves.
Yeah, exactly. A few times I had the opportunity to watch on C-SPAN or something questions with the Prime Minister. Yeah. And you go back to some of the legendary days when Thatcher stood and answered questions. In those days, the minority party in Parliament had a shadow minister, someone who knew each of the programs in government and was prepared to debate them with the majority. I mean, Madigan is never responsible for answering questions on what he does as Prime Minister of Illinois. The Republicans are not in a position, and make no effort the last 10 years, to offer policy alternatives of the kind that win elections. The reason the minority parties the win elections in parliamentary is they have alternatives. The Republicans haven't offered an alternative to the budget mess in Springfield since the Blagojevich days.
So is part of it a personnel problem, and you need new leadership in the House and the Senate?
I think you need new leadership in the House and Senate, and you probably need a lot of new members.
Well, I mean, now, to qualify this, your political judgment only goes so far. You did endorse me when I ran for governor. So, before people think you're omniscient, you always exercise good judgment.
And I ran myself twice unsuccessfully. Right. So, yeah, obviously I'm not very good at this.
Well, so on the last topic before we let you go, back to trying to rescue manufacturing in Illinois, the electoral politics in the party. We've talked about the General Assembly and the composition of it. You were seen, as I said before, and I mean it genuinely. You were kind of a mentor to me back when I ran my first statewide campaign, running Pat O'Malley's campaign for governor in 2002, and you were kind of like, okay, let's actually understand how state government works. And so you were the guy that everybody went to. What about on the electoral side? What about the Republican Party in its previous and maybe even current iteration prevents talent from bubbling to the top, prevents us from putting forward better statewide candidates than we've had for the better part of the last 2 decades, as well as better legislative candidates?
Boy, you know, if I had the silver bullet and I knew how to fix it, I would tell you. But what my quick observation would be this, is that when I ran, the money in Chicago, the Republicrats, the Republican kind of sort of financial leadership who were only interested in somebody they knew, okay, never got past the idea that you couldn't just run this as kind of a consensus thing. They didn't realize that public policy made a difference. They always had the next 4 quarters, the next 2 quarters, the next 2 years in their sights. So, you know, I think we've lost a lot of emerging leadership out of the Republican Party in Illinois because the leadership in the donor base doesn't understand the difference between Rahm Emanuel and Jeannie Ives. You know, they don't. Well, they do. They actually understand. They like Rahm because they see him at the kind of places they have dinner. You know, where these people that are just talking about issues all the time or care about things that they're icky. You know, right. So you know, we had this Thompson groomed leadership that kind of sort of put up with Edgar, and we're a little dismayed by George Ryan, but tolerant. You know, they kind of sort of thought, well, let's see how it works with the Democrats in charge. But there's very little mentoring of emerging leadership in the state of Illinois, and we don't have Koch brothers. We don't have the kind of people who in Illinois, in my opinion, the donor base that develop a vision and say, you know, we're going to support people as they make progress.
Do you think that's starting to change with the election of Rauner? I think there's some reason for optimism in that front with Rauner, as well as some of the people who finally said, well, this is ridiculous, and maybe this idea that I support Rahm because I'm afraid of the worst, of what could be worse, just guarantees the worst.
Yeah, I hope so. You know, and I'd like to believe I'm not misleading myself thinking that Rauner maybe is the beginning of a major change. Or, you know, worse though is, you know, think for a minute, Rauner purchased the Illinois Republican Party for less money than almost anybody could have dreamed of 20 years ago. I mean, he installed the chairman, he whistles the tune, the legislature votes present when he tells them to vote present. I mean, unfortunately, Rauner, because of his background and his skill set, is not the kind of leader that's going to rise up bright and thoughtful people underneath him. I mean, it's a top-down, I write the check, you do what I tell you. The kind of stuff you do when you walk into a screwed-up company and kick the management out, right. I get, but I'm not sure it's strong party building in the long run. I mean, I think the Republican Party's got to go back to the grassroots, to the faith-based community, to the TMAs of the world, to the small businesses, to the small chambers of commerce, talk about what it is we need in leadership, and start bringing people out the way Georgia did 20 years ago and flip that whole state around, all around us.
And tell them, oh, by the way, if you want this thing to be flipped around, you can't be an innocent bystander on the sidelines. I know you're running a business. I know you're beset with kids going to school and your day-to-day, the day-to-day operation of your business. But we need all hands on deck here. So don't say, oh, yeah, he's got it. No, no, no. Yeah. This is not a one-man job. Right. Or, right, we need you engaged and involved if we're going to flip this thing around. So you need to tell your employees, you know, you better vote our collective pocketbook and be a little bit more activist than they've been.
Yeah, and they've got to talk to their employees. I mean, it's one of the battles we fight at TMA because our members are not very political. We have a robust GRC. They contribute because we tell them it's important for them to contribute. We have a modestly nice little PAC for a small association. But they don't want to talk to their employees about who to vote for. They don't feel comfortable telling people how to vote. But I mean, you know, if we're going to change...
It's like the difference between the black churches and the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we should look at what somebody else does. Again, a successful model that activates the people that look to you for leadership and provide the leadership they're looking for.
And the part of the message I've been helping the TMA absorb over the last 18 months is it's not going to get better unless we are involved in this game. I mean, hoping that Greg Bays is going to stumble on the solution down in Springfield, or that all by himself, Bruce Rauner is going to infuse the General Assembly. So it starts with a scorecard, and we're going to call legislators to account. Suburban legislators that represent manufacturers and good areas, we're going to ask them, why is your score 60%? Why aren't you 100% pro-business and pro-jobs? I mean, you want to be pro-middle class, that's about jobs. Okay, it's not about Illinois having the lowest workforce participation we've had in 30 years. You ought to be embarrassed about that. You know, we just need to point out to people that these kind of things that retard job creation, that lose us bids, that mean that manufacturing doesn't take place here, that companies like State Farm begin to move their processing out of state. We're disinvesting, you know, we're forcing disinvesture investment in the state of Illinois.
If you were advising Governor Rauner on this budget impasse right now, what would you say to him, regardless of the outcome in March and November? Say you get out of the superminority in the House, but you're still in the minority, you're still in the superminority in the Senate. What does victory look like for you short term, or should Bruce Rauner think victory looks like for him short term, like this election cycle and any budget deal that's cut?
Boy, I don't
because that seems to me part of the problem is I don't know that anybody says this is what victory looks like on this landscape.
Yeah, I have been a little, like, not critical, but flummoxed or confused that even he might believe somehow that rolling the income tax back up solves his budget problem. I mean, his budget problem is so structural and so difficult that I don't know. That's why I don't want to think about a sovereign state filing bankruptcy. I don't want to be part of a state that does file bankruptcy. But I don't see any incremental pathway from where we are today as a guy who did budgets down there for 10 years to a balanced budget. I mean, you cannot account for the pensions, the unfunded debts that we already owe, the unpaid bills, and the trajectory of the programs anywhere under a 10% income tax. And that 10% income tax would have economic, you know, reverberations, which would probably kill its collection.
So what Rauner's doing right now, basically saying, look, we'll pay money as we get it in per court decrees, and until Madigan and to a lesser extent Cullerton are willing to deal, and at least on some of the component parts of the turnaround agenda, that we just will have no formal budget.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an alternative for me. If he called me down and asked me what to do, I don't know what to tell him right now. I mean, this is not a sustainable system. It wasn't when he walked in the door. It just didn't happen in the 11, 13 months he's been there. This is the outgrowth of the Blagojevich budgets. Okay, where the General Assembly allowed on a roll call vote for them to pretend they had $2.2 billion in revenue from a bond transaction that was a fake. I mean, they capitalized 25 years of arbitrage gains when they did that $10 billion bond deal and pretended that was a revenue source, and he spent it. And he built the base of his budget. So you got to roll all the way back to what budgets looked like in 2001, 2002, and start stuffing them inside your revenue stream.
All right, I hear what you're saying. I should be looking for a bungalow in Northwest Indiana. I got it.
Actually, I told my wife from Florida.
He is Steve Rauschenberger, the president and the CEO of the Technology and Manufacturing Association, representing small and mid-sized manufacturers in the state of Illinois, former state senator for 15 years. We've been pleased to have Steve Rauschenberger as our guest on this edition of Against the Current. Steve, thanks.
No, I enjoyed it.